Hi, this is Eli Bremer. I'm here to the present Team Two's Milestone 2 for the third week of this class. Our team consists of Brandy Barber, Brian Holt, Jim Morgan, Eli Bremer, and Genevieve Whitaker. Quick overview of what we're going to talk about this week. We're going to start with our research objectives to go back to the basics of why we're actually doing this project. Our group then discussed heavily the proposed scope of the project. There were several alternatives listed in the RFP, and we had long discussions about that, and we've settled on what the entire scope of our project will be. Third thing we're going to cover this week is the qualitative versus the quantitative approach in our research methodology as we move forward with this project. Then we're going to move on to the description of our framework that we're going to use as we move forward with this project for our client. We're going to talk then about the overall structure of the questionnaire and then a conclusion. The research objectives were laid out in the RFP, but we felt like it was important to turn back to them and remember exactly what it was that our client wanted us to do. The first objective that was given to us from HRI was to survey and identify our potential audience. Second was to test our strategic approach and tools, ours meaning HRI's. Third is to act as a promotional tool in and of itself. And the fourth was to build an internal capacity for growth. So as we progressed this week with our project, we were trying to keep in mind the objectives that our client had given us for the research, because we believe that that is the number one most important thing we can do is meet the objectives of our client, and we believe we're capable of doing that. As we looked through the potential scope of the project, we realized that there were several ways we could take this. HRI had stated that there were three possibilities. One is that the proposing company would do the preliminary research and NGOs would then take over all the subsequent research. There was a second option in which the proposing company could do some more extensive research, and a third option in which they could do all the research. The more we looked at this project, the more we looked at the scope of it and also the budget, we determined that it was only feasible to propose that we would conduct the preliminary part of this project. Part of the reason for that is the entirety of the budget was only $70,000, and we also believe we could only look at a few countries and get in-depth research like that. So we've determined that we will propose under section 3.3 Roman numeral 2 of the RFP, which states that, quote, an international commercial market research agent carries out the research in focus groups, and a regional NGO does the quantitative research online. What we believe this does is it allows us to do a fair amount of research, and we'll get into that in a minute of exactly what our research will be. And then we're going to hand over that research to the client. They will then work with a regional NGO to do the remainder of the quantitative research that they need to do, and they're going to attempt to do that online. Now, the other decision we had to make this week was what countries we would limit our research to. It's such a large and diverse region that, given the financial restrictions and the scope of this project, it was unfeasible to do more than a couple of countries. So we looked at two potential groupings. The first was the UAE, Egypt, Jordan, and Qatar, and the reason for this is that these tend to be some of the more affluent communities in the region, with the second group being Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, and Yemen. And those were countries that have recently gone through the Arab Spring, and they've had revolutions there. Partly because the scope of this project has largely to do with young people. Young people were heavily part of the Arab Spring, and it also has to do with technology. We also felt like maybe looking at the countries who'd been through revolutions in the Arab Spring and the beliefs of those young people, that could be a very interesting subject as HRI moves forward with this project. As we investigated the qualitative versus the quantitative methods for research, there were three questions HRI wanted to have answered. The first is, where are the growth opportunities in this region? The second is, what does HRI's potential audience look like in this region? And the third is, what are the most effective methods for growth in this new region that they're looking at expanding into? As we looked throughout the entire project, we believed that this needed to be a multi-tiered approach, and it would start with a mixed method approach to our data collection. The first thing we wanted to do is conduct a broad survey of youth using technology. This is inherently what HRI wants to eventually do. They want to be using technology to do this. And we believe that this will give us insight into exactly where the future research can go. So this is going to be more of a quantitative type of survey at the very, very beginning of our project. It'll help us identify the direction we go. From there, we're going to move into focus groups for the majority of the research that our company will produce. After that, we'll turn this over and it will go back into international NGOs, and they will then conduct more quantitative research using technology again. We've determined that the qualitative research is very necessary in the early stages, and that most of the data we collect is going to be based on subjective response and in-depth interviews, especially following that first broad survey of youth. Most of the data we collected is not going to be able to be measured, it's more observed. The general nature of our research is exploratory. We're trying to find out more about this region, more about the views in this region. And again, that leads us to having most of this project wind up being qualitative research instead of quantitative research. We don't know exactly what we're going to expect from the data, but we want to develop an understanding of the problem so that we can assist HRI in achieving their growth in the region. And one of the struggles we're going to face in doing this is that much of the data is based on feelings and culture and perceptions. And again, this leads us back to a qualitative approach as opposed to a quantitative approach, that combined with language barrier issues. We also acknowledge that there will be perspectives and perceptions from many different regions and groups. And so again, developing a qualitative approach through all those diverse groups, languages, and cultures could be difficult. So our conclusion is that a mixed method supports reaching our research goals and objectives for this particular portion of the project. The framework we've developed is presented on this slide. We like to test the full spectrum of human rights, having religion, language, LGBT issues, and we also need to make sure we're including women in there. You can see below that there's a constraint of $70,000. That's going to be a difficult constraint to meet, which is again why we narrowed the scope so we could properly provide high quality research. With that small of a budget, again, we knew we were going to have a reduced number of respondents, and therefore we needed to have in-depth research done there. We also have a time constraint, which will make this somewhat of a difficult project. The participants are going to be youth ages 16 to 25. We're going to be using e-telecommunications and media, of course, to reach them and to do some of our quantitative research on them. And then after that, we're handing off to regional NGOs, to Amnesty International, do some of the rest of the research. You can see below that our sampling strategy that we're going to have developed, and that is random sampling will be weighted to access factors of gender balance, sexual orientation, political participation, language, and religion. Those are all issues that we believe to be significant to the region, and our quantitative research will give us an idea of exactly how much weight we need to start putting on those as we move forward with the project. As far as structuring our questionnaire, we more looked at the objectives of how we were going to do this. We knew we need to identify a potential audience and respondents. We need to evaluate the ability to utilize technology for our research in these countries. This was very, very important to the client, so that needs to be one of the main components of the questionnaire and how we put it together. We need to probably also evaluate how people are responding using technology and the rate of non-responses and things like that. One of the outcomes we need to have is we need to identify which are the most significant issues: the race, the religion, the language and illiteracy rates, gender and GLBT issues. And these were key interests to the client, and we did some outside research as well to identify that these are major concerns for human rights issues. Then following this, we're going to conduct the focus groups, and we haven't put together the methodology for the focus group yet. That'll come in the next part of the proposal. But we are going to conduct qualitative research on the information gathered in the questionnaire. So the purpose of the questionnaire will be to gather research for the focus group. And that concludes the progress of Team 2 for this week. Thanks for your time, and we look forward to updating this for next week.